Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris DesRoches. I am with the Kingfield Neighborhood Association. I am the board chair, and joined with me is Kim Ellison, candidate for at-large school board here in Minneapolis. So what we wanted to do as a neighborhood association in partnership with Tangletown and Lindale was kind of have, I'm not sure if this will be your final conversation you'll have about the election, but one of the final conversations about the election and about the at-large school board seat. There has been two other forums that have already happened, both with you and other school board candidates. We will post the links to both of those. The goal of this kind of discussion is not to repeat those questions, although we will kind of touch on some similar topics, I'm sure. So if you are interested in learning more or digging deeper into some of those, I would encourage you to check out those forums. So welcome, Kim. Thank you again for joining us. I guess I'll just maybe give you a quick second to introduce yourself. And one of the things that I think would be good maybe to talk a little bit about is the school board. What you do, what your role as a director is, and how you see, how the school board operates.
Sure. Okay, my name is Kim Ellison. I am the mother of 4 children, all grown. I went to Minneapolis Public Schools, but out of school now. I'm a former teacher. I taught alternative ed for 12 years, and in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. And I've been on the school board. This is my 9th year on the school board. I was appointed for 1 term and then elected for 2 terms. And I'm asking for the support to serve again. I'm really excited about what the schools are doing, and I want to see that work through. So the board, as a board member, we're a governing board, and so we have the 3 main duties: hire, fire, and evaluate a superintendent, balance a budget, and write policy on how the district runs. The superintendent is our only employee, and we set goals for him to work with his employees, which are the teachers, the other staff, to meet those goals for our students. And so that's what a governing board basically does.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the role of like an at-large, the at-large position on the school board, kind of in the makeup of the school board, how there's different representatives of different areas, and maybe how you see the at-large position differing, or if you do see it differing, kind of in your role both on the board and kind of connected to the community?
Sure. When I was elected to the school board, it was the first year that we went to districts. Prior to this district setup, so like 8 years ago, it was 7 at-large board members. And then there was a bill passed at the legislature that said, no, Minneapolis will now be set up a lot like the park board, where we have 3 at-large members and then 1 member from 6 districts throughout the city. And they did that, and I was excited about it because there were members who lived in North and Northeast who thought I could never get elected as an at-large member. And this way, there would be a spot for that. There's a District 1, which is Northeast, District 2, which is North Minneapolis resident. When I was first elected, I was the North Minneapolis representative. And at the time, at the end of my 4 years, it's a 9-member board, and there were 4 members who lived in the north half of the city, 1 in Northeast, and then 3 who were from North Minneapolis. And I thought that was not a well-balanced board for a 9-member board. I thought at least half of the members should come from the half of the city. And so I ran for at-large, which opened up that North Minneapolis seat, and was successful being an at-large member. So now there are maybe 5 or 6 members from the north half of the city on the board.
No, that's really interesting. I didn't know that it actually was the other way previously, and it was all at large. That's really.
It was all at large. It was 7 at large, mostly from South and Southwest Minneapolis, elected, and so yes. So when we went to the district, there had to be a Northeast representative, and there had to be a North Side representative, which is, and for me, I think that's important because if I have a problem in the schools and I go and I'm like, who can I talk to? Let me talk to my elected officials. And I look at all the names, I look at all the addresses, and I'm like, there's nobody here who I can relate to. Yeah. But this way, they're just 7 at-large members from not my part of town. Mm-hmm. But now there's at least one person from the 6 different districts in town. And so you can at least see an address that, okay, this is someone who might understand what I'm experiencing in my neighborhood. And so I think it's important for that reason.
Oh, totally. That's really interesting. One question I had that kind of relating back to the park board, do school board directors get salary? Because I know park board directors get kind of a commission, or not a commission, a stipend or a salary for their work. Do school board directors get a salary for the work that you guys do?
We get a salary. I feel like it's more of a stipend. It's a really good second job. When I first got elected, that pay was $13,800 a year. We were able to raise it to $20,000.
Okay.
So we do get some money to do this work.
Yeah, which I don't want to editorialize here, but which I've always thought has been really, really important, right? Because it's important work that you guys do, and I think it's good to professionalize that work so that you feel like you can dedicate the time to it. And I think there's a certain privilege that comes with just being a volunteer, right? So.
Right, yeah, yes. And I think it's important to put value in the work. We have to negotiate a $750 million budget.
Wow.
You ought to pay those people who are making those big decisions about schools. So.
For sure. Can you talk, one of the things that I didn't see, and I know you've served as the school board representative on the planning commission, correct? The city's planning commission. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other roles that you play besides the kind of directly connected to schools, but some of those roles on whether it's planning? I'm not sure if you sit on any other commissions or boards. Yeah.
There are a number of other boards that, like the planning commission, say there needs to be a school board member on this board. And so outside of my school board work, but I think tied to being on the school board, I work with Northside Achievement Zone. I work with Minnesota Education Equity Partners, sit on their boards. But also we have an MOA with the Native community. And so there needs to be a board representative to the Metro Urban Indian Directors Group and the Phillips Indian Educators Group. The city planning is also one of them. We have board, and you don't all have to do each of these, but we have someone on the neighborhood, we have NRP. So there are a number of boards that a board member serves on outside of the work we do on the school board. And I can't think of them all, but we go through that every January. Like, here's some other boards that we need a representative on.
And I think that's something that people don't really realize, with whether that's school board directors or park board commissioners as well too, right? That there's not only the work that you do kind of directly for the school board or the park board, but there's these kind of other roles that you play throughout the city. And I think that's important for people to know, right? How do you, kind of tying back to that, how do you view your role, like especially on the planning commission as it relates to schools? Like, what are kind of the intersection of those two things?
Well, I think one thing is my connection to families, being a school board member. And so then that's important being on the city planning commission. If you're making decisions about the city, you want somebody who got a relationship with the people who live in the city. And so that's one thing, but it's also looking at it, and you may have heard, we've had a number of mayors who've said, strong schools make strong neighborhoods, and strong neighborhoods create strong schools. And so there's this intersectionality between the city and the schools. And it's important when they're making decisions about city policy that someone from the school board is there to speak on how this might affect school district policy. So.
No, totally. Thanks. So I guess changing topics a little bit, I'm glad we were able to cover kind of a little bit of a background of this kind of MPS's system and kind of your role. One of the things that I've been really interested in is after the kind of the murder of George Floyd and everything that has followed, how that's as a neighborhood group, I think that is really, I wouldn't say changed, but it's focused a lot of our attention, thinking about anti-racism work and the systemic racial inequities that are across our whole system. I know that was a big part, and I don't want to maybe get into it maybe a little bit now, but the CDD, right, was what you were kind of focusing on there. How has kind of the murder of George Floyd impacted you maybe impacting MPS's role within the city, and maybe how do you view that changing kind of your role on the board itself?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have had a contract with the Minneapolis Police Department. It was renewable every 3 years. So every 3 years, we had passionate discussion about police in schools. And I remember 3 years ago, because that was up for renewal this year anyway, the contract, and it happens in August. But I remember 3 years ago having a number of students show up at board meetings and email board members and call board members, which is not something that students tend to do. It makes reaching out to board members like that, saying they do not feel comfortable with police in schools. And I remember the rallying cry was no cops in schools. And so we had a big discussion about it 3 years ago. And I remember ending up voting for it because I knew that if something happened, 911 would be called and there would be a cop in a school. And so this was my reasoning 3 years ago. And I would rather that cop be someone who had a relationship with the school, someone who's gone through additional training with the schools, who knows our principal in that school, as opposed to a cop off the street. But then in January of last year, 2019, in January, the board passed a resolution that talked about how the actions of the Minneapolis Police Department did not align with the values of Minneapolis public schools, and said that the actions hurt the program. And then a year and a half later, with the murder, it was like, well, nothing had changed. The actions of the police department on the streets was still hindering the program. And I didn't see it passing in August. And then some board members were like, well, it's part of our budget. So before we pass a budget, let's just discontinue this contract, which is why we made the move in June of this year. So.
What do you see replacing those officers, the SRO officers, right?
School resource officers. So SROs.
Yeah, I guess maybe what was the role? Obviously, like, I would say security, but safety in schools, right? What do you see as replacing kind of some of the key functions maybe that they were serving? And how do you see a new, whether that's private security or some sort of different system? What do you see as kind of like fulfilling some of those needs within schools?
Sure. Well, we have already hired some staff members to play the role of not the law enforcement part of what SROs did, but the response. If something happens at the school, what is the response? If 911 needs to be called, who is that contact person with the police officer? So that's the role that these additional positions that we've hired will play in our schools. And for us, we're also, as part of our comprehensive district design, have been doing this culture and climate framework work, how to make a welcoming school, and helping staff center their beliefs and their views and around students. And we think that some of the work that we're doing with staff will then make schools safer as well. So it's like a twofold. It's not any one thing, but yeah, we're coming at it at different angles to make schools safer for students.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you really haven't been able to test those things. Are kind of happening right now, but it's because of COVID, right? One of my questions was like, well, how has that worked? And then I realized that was our question. But
distance learning, right? Distance learning.
So those sorts of things really aren't. We haven't really tested them out or anything yet.
It's developing. They're developing. So, most of the interactions with police officers nationally are outside of school. Someone coming to the school, maybe it's child protection or child custody issues, or an adult who is upset with another adult or child in the school. And so having a resource, not an officer, but somebody there who can address those concerns is important for us to keep students safe in school. So.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been watching kind of a couple of the other forums and following this debate a little bit, it seems like there's a lot of discussion between the autonomy that school communities have versus kind of setting district-wide policy. Maybe as it relates, because this also ties back, I think, to some of the CDD questions. How do you view that? How do you view the autonomy of a specific school or a community that attends that school versus kind of like citywide policy, or school district wide policy.
Yeah.
Where do you kind of fall philosophically in terms of that
Sure. For me, there are things, our policy should say, you can't break the law, you can't do unethical things. But I don't know school communities as well as the people who are working in those schools. And so I would like to just be able to say, here are the goals, make sure students are proficient, make sure they're learning, make sure they're safe. Don't break any laws doing that. And then let the schools determine how best to meet the needs of the students that are in their schools. That's how I would like to do it. Like I said, I taught in alternative education, and I worked with students who were not well served by traditional public schools. And so by the time they got to us, we had a little more flexibility on how we met the needs of the students. And I think that's important. I would like, and one of my personal goals when I got on the school board was figure out what worked in this alternative school that I could take to scale so that students wouldn't have to leave the district to find success in schools. So those are some of the things I'm still working on.
Yeah. Do you think that there's what are kind of the key policies that, obviously those kind of vision things, right? But what are kind of the key, when I think about like community engagement and think about like, there may be folks in individual schools or individual communities who are doing the best for themselves or their individual school or their individual communities, but thinking how that relates to kind of like systemic racism or injustice, right? Like individual choices by, I think that, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Nice White Parents podcast,
Yes.
or kind of, I don't want to say phenomenon, but like that kind of concept, right? That there are folks out there who are making decisions, maybe not solely based on race, but their decisions have implications into segregation, into kind of perpetuating racism across a district. So I guess that's maybe a statement, not a question, but I was just wondering, like, how do you think about that, right? Because I think that also relates back to like the autonomy of individual places versus kind of like vision and goal setting at a district level.
Sure. I think one thing we do at the board level and have been talking about for a number of years is our values. And we did that with community and have really decided, and really committed to making important decisions based on our values. And I think what happens sometimes is we look at schools and we hear parents like in the Nice White Parent podcast who things might be going well for them, but there was still disparity between the white students and the students of color. And if we say that it's important for students of color to perform well too, well then we might need to disrupt some of what's happening for the Nice White Parents. So I believe that, I think Paul Wellstone said it best, when we all do better, we all do better. And so to focus on students who are not succeeding and giving them what they need, I think lifts everybody and everybody's able to do better.
Great, thanks. Want to kind of jumping maybe to a couple questions on the CDD. I know you've answered a lot of them, and I would encourage folks who want to learn more to look at some of the forums. And there's the resource online that the school district put together is very comprehensive. One of the critiques of it has been, I think, a lack of details, or these specifics. How do you view a document like that in terms of its I think there's like a vision statement, right, is like the highest you can get, down to like we're going to spend $1 on computers or whatever. How do you view that document in terms of that? Because I think one of the critiques has been like it doesn't say exactly like how we're going to get to kind of some of those goals. And yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about that and where you see maybe the key in implementation, kind of filling in some of those gaps. Yeah.
What I know is that what we're doing isn't working. And I have seen, and I know, and we don't know, we haven't done this before, but I've seen other districts that have centralized their magnet schools, that have gone to neighborhood schools, and achievement for all students has improved. If we're able to focus our resources in ways that serve our students where their largest needs are. And I don't think the largest needs are in transportation, which is where we're spending a lot of money right now. If we could get more supports in the schools, like counselors, and replace that could make people feel safer in schools, you know, as we transition out of school resource officers, and just more supports that, you know, spending our money in closer to the classroom with the students. And yes, and like I said, what I know is what we're doing now is not working. And I'm willing to look at what's working in other districts and trying to implement that here, and see if that would work here for all of our students. So.
Great. Talking a little bit about community engagement and maybe a little bit about kind of CDD, there was a question that came in that talked kind of a little bit about that the school district does a good job at reaching out and asking questions to kind of parents and community members, but there's a feeling within the community that maybe that voice, whether that's a collective voice or whether that's individual voices, aren't either influencing decisions or like things aren't changing due to that voice. I guess maybe do you just want to respond to that and say, the question specifically said, how can we hold leadership more accountable? And maybe how do you want community members holding you accountable, kind of if you were reelected?
Sure. Contact your school board members. That's important. And I think, you know, some things specifically to the comprehensive district design, you know, we were going to vote on that 4 months prior. Community said, we don't think we know enough about it. So we were able, because of that engagement with community, we pushed back the actual vote of that design. And I was not expecting a pandemic to occur, but because of engagement with community, we changed some of the programming in schools, some of the boundaries for neighborhood schools, and then the actual date of voting on it, so that we were able to give community more information and feel more comfortable about. But how do you hold leadership accountable is, you know, talk to them. It's important to vote, so vote for the person that you think is best aligned with your beliefs, but then stay in touch with that person. Make sure that they're following through on what it was that they said they were going to do for you.
Great, thanks. There was a few questions that came in that we had from community members, kind of about the relationship between MPS and the teachers union, both about, and I think just the union in general, right? Like how you feel that relationship is. And then there were some questions especially regards to like COVID, coming back from distance learning, like working with the teachers union to kind of figure that out. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing now and how you see that relationship kind of progressing into the future?
Sure. It's really important that our teachers union have a strong relationship with our superintendent and his senior staff. And then as well, in the past, I have met when teachers union president has reached out and said, can we meet on a regular basis? I've been able to sit down with the teachers union as well, but that relationship works best if they have a good relationship, if they're working closely with leadership in the district. And so in terms of COVID, and then we have COVID, and there are all sorts of different beliefs of what's best for students. And I think we need to take staff concerns into consideration as well. But I know we have a special ed advisory committee. We have an advisory committee for our African American, our Black students, our families, our Asian families, our Hispanic families, and then we have a special education advisory council as well. And those families need more supports, and they're asking for more supports. And I think if we're able to provide that for families in the schools, it might be a stronger connection for families that are suffering at home right now. And I know suffering is kind of a strong word, but some families, it's really hard. But teachers are doing an amazing job. You know, I think they're going over and above. I couldn't, as a former teacher, I couldn't imagine what that looks like, trying to teach now at home or, in my classroom, but on a computer with students who may or may not have a device, who may or may not have reliable internet at home, who I'm not able to see face to face. And so I think we need to be cognizant of the needs of students, but then the concerns of staff as well. And I believe we have the district has a COVID response team that meets the leadership at the Davis Center meets regularly with the leaders of all of our bargaining units to talk about what does this COVID response look like and how do we make sure that we're serving students in a safe and healthy way. And I think those conversations need to continue.
Yeah. How do you see distance learning affecting kind of the achievement gap? Like, how do you see, being out of the classroom affecting, the students who, all the things you said, right, are most kind of like using our schools as like community centers and places to get lunches and the connections, right? Like, who are maybe at the most need. How do you see distance learning both affecting them maybe and then kind of affecting the achievement gap, and how do we come back from that, right? Like, what is the next step to think about that?
Sure. I am a social person, and I think most people are. I do best with connections with people, and I think schools serve that function very well. For some of our students, though, school was not a good place. They were not making adequate progress in their academics or healthy relationships, and being at home has actually worked for some of our students that weren't doing well in school. Again, when we look at the needs, the students who had greater needs at school, maybe the ones that don't have the devices at home, maybe the ones that don't have reliable internet at home. And so then that divide becomes larger. But for some of our students at home, I mean, I have said, like you said, next steps. What are we going to do when we say, okay, come back, and we have some students say, no, this worked better for me. I was able to engage safer or in a better way for me in my learning online. What do we do when we have students that say, I'm not coming back to school? I don't think we can go back to what we considered normal, what was before, because again, what was before wasn't working for every student. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to learn better ways of connecting and different ways of teaching and learning. So.
Do you see kind of coming out of this we have the experience now of running this kind of model. Do you see this almost as, like, I don't say a spin-off, but like a supplementary program where some kids could, whether it's one day a week or whether it's full time, go to a more distance learning, now that we know, maybe some of the students who are better served in kind of a model like this?
Yeah, I think we should. I think we need to look at best practices for distance learning and who that works for. And if we have families that say, maybe not every day, maybe I come into school like once a week, but everything else is happening online, I think we should respect that to figure out how we can incorporate that into what our day looks like.
Do you think that there are kids who are falling behind because of distance learning right now?
Yes, yeah, I do. And yes, and it's a national phenomenon. I meet once a week with other board members from an organization we belong to, Council of Great City Schools, something else that we have a board member representative on. And it's a national phenomenon, and it is mostly our Black and Brown students that are not as well served with distance learning. It's that's the statistics I'm hearing. And locally, we need to figure that out, how we can make sure that we're connecting with every student.
Yeah, no, great. So kind of doing a complete shift, but one of the questions that we got from one of the community members was talking about kind of school facilities, like the physical spaces. The one of the questions was like, how do we open up these spaces more to the public? They were talking, I think, about like a track space or like a football space, or and I think that's an interesting question. I also think that it's an even more interesting question too when you think about it in terms of COVID. And schools are big spaces that are indoors. There's a lot of space to them, and I know we've struggled as a neighborhood organization to think about like, well, where could we hold community meetings, that sort of thing. How do you view kind of school facilities as in in their in in their relationship to the community around them, maybe not as specifically educational spaces, but could be used in other ways?
Right. Gathering spaces, basically. And I know we, as a school board, we've talked a lot about full service community schools where we've got relationships with outside organizations to come into the schools to provide some of the health and wellness issues, concerns for families, which I think is important. I know we partnered with the city who just for election day, a lot of their polls are in living facilities. And they were like, can we partner with the schools and make sure that we can use a gymnasium, which is larger, which has more space where people can social distance while they're voting so that they can vote safely. I think there's space for that. We also have facilities. Our buildings are old also. And so we need a lot of work. I know we're doing some purchases, we'll be talking about it tomorrow night, to upgrade some of our filtration so that the air is cleaner and safer, especially in this COVID era that we find ourselves in. And so because they're old buildings, they need a lot of upgrade, but they have gymnasiums, they have auditoriums, these big spaces where people can be in the same room and be safely social distance. And I think it's an important resource that we need to open up for, but then keeping it clean. And then you have to come in and sanitize, after every event. So we need to make sure that there's time between those open spaces for folks to come in to make sure it stays clean and healthy.
What would you prioritize in terms of like capital improvements within the district? Maybe not specific like places, or maybe there are specific places, but thinking about, like you mentioned, like filtration systems, right? Like how would you prioritize improvements to the physical assets of MPS?
Well, filtration, I think anything we can do to make our air in facilities safer would be important. And I think technology. Also, I would like to prioritize bringing some of our buildings up to par technologically with what we can provide to students and families and staff.
Great. One of the questions that I thought was really interesting that we got from a community member was, in your opinion, what is the ideal? I think they had the ideal day for a third grader, a seventh grader, and a 10th grader. And maybe you don't have to cover all of those. Maybe you could pick one, or if you want to hit on each one of them. But kind of in your opinion, describe an ideal day for kind of for those kids in the system.
Sure. I think I can do 10th grade because I worked at a school that I thought was amazing, and it was a high school. It was 7th through 12th grade. We started students 7th through 12th grade in the school, and there need to be relationships with the adults in the building. There needs to be an understanding of what the needs are for students. When I taught, it was a small school, it was a small alternative school, but it was a high school, and my boss said it's not that our students can't learn. Like I said, this is an alternative school. It's that they got other things going on in their lives. So we had counselors, and for a number of years, as many counselors as teachers on staff. And so our boss would say to the counselors, I need you to get the students in school because I got teachers who can teach them, but they need to be here. And then even within school, it's not like when I went to go work at the school, I was coming from a different school where I was the math teacher. And the principal said, well, you can't be the math teacher here because it's about building relationships with students. And so first hour is reading. Every student had to take a reading class, so every teacher had to be able to teach reading. I'm not a reading teacher, so I got the independent readers. It was told, just make sure there's a book in the building that they want to read. And then they went to their core courses, language arts and social studies. And then after lunch, and we all ate lunch together, they went to math. And again, I was the math teacher, so I had the more advanced math students. But, you know, I was seeing students 2, 3, 4 times a day, building relationships and making sure that they understood that I saw them, I knew them, and was there to serve them. So I think an ideal day includes time where you can, I don't know, let your hair down is the right word, but where you can just kind of be yourself and not try to perform for others, whether it's, you know, as a student or as a teacher, even just to get to know folks. There needs to be time in the day where my strengths are acknowledged and supported. And I think there needs to be time in the day for fun. So.
Okay. And maybe this could be maybe our last question, because we're running up on time a little bit here. But what would be your biggest priority, or some of your priorities, if you were to be reelected in kind of your next term? What do you see as the most important things that you want to focus on?
I think for me, students need to see themselves in their curriculum, in the naming of their in the names of their buildings, in their teachers. They really need to feel a connection to what they're learning. And so I've been pushing on this ethnic studies courses for a long time. And I'm really excited because we're about to vote on it being a requirement for graduation. It's important for students not just to see themselves, but to see others and understand others in the world. We are about to form a committee that looks at our building names. What are our values, and shouldn't what we call buildings reflect our values? And so should they be named after slave owners or named after generals who have massacred Native Americans? I mean, you know, so we're going to set these values and what shouldn't our schools be called, and then identify buildings that have names that don't fit this framework, and then go to the school community and say, okay, here's your chance. So what do you want to be called? Who are you? And let them decide. And so that's important for me. I want to follow through on some of that.
Can I ask you, who is going to sit on that committee? Like, how are you going to decide, like, make those decisions?
Every board member will be able to appoint a community member. There will not be a board member on this committee. It'll be all community.
Cool. Sorry, I cut you off. I don't know if you had more
No,
priorities.
that was it. That was it.
I will just say that being in Kingfield, the middle school here is Justice Page, which is, I think, everyone is very, very proud of. And I think names, obviously, as you just explained, mean something. And I think it means, a lot to our community that's the name of one of our schools that kids from our neighborhood go to. So yeah, I guess I'll maybe give you kind of the last word and say, if you'd like to say anything about the upcoming election, about yourself, kind of as a closing statement, and then we will say goodbye. So
sure. Yes, everybody please vote. If you have not already, make sure you vote by November 3rd. I think that's like one of the most important things we can do as citizens. And then vote for the person who you believe will meet the values that you have. I want to say personally, I've been a parent. I am a parent. I've been a teacher. I've been in the trenches with families in school buildings and with staff, and I know I think I have an idea of what they need because I've been there with them, and I'm really excited about continuing this work, and hope I have your support. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And then we'll cut it.